Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on the outdoor refurbishment of historic buildings and landscapes. I'm pleased to be joined today by Geraldine O'Farrell, who is a Senior Building Services Engineer at Historic England. In her role, Geraldine provides help and guidance on lighting, power, fire alarms, lightning protection, and surge arresters. Geraldine has also been responsible for producing Historic England's guidance on lighting, including the publication External Lighting for Historic Buildings. While Geraldine has dedicated over 20 years to Historic England, she previously worked as a design manager at a design and building contracting company in London and also a design consultant. With her vast knowledge, experience and passion for heritage, architecture and engineering, we're sure you'll be keen to hear what Geraldine has to say soon on the topic of refurbishment. Whether you're a lighting designer, a contractor, an architect or an engineer, no doubt you'll be seeing an increasing number of refurbishment projects yourself cropping up. For us at Thorn Lighting as a manufacturer, it's no different. And in fact, throughout our 95 years in business, refurbishment has always been something we've been involved in. With rising energy costs and costs generally, the demand to reduce energy consumption, delays in supply chains, and generally a greater awareness of sustainability, refurbishment is the direction in which a lot of people are heading in. So the question is, how can we handle refurbishment when it involves historic and heritage buildings and landscapes? In this session, we're going to be considering external lighting of facades, and then actually, if you join us again next month, we're going to move our focus indoors. So today's presentation is due to last around 15 to 20 minutes. Everyone is on mute, but we do encourage you to ask questions. You can do that either in the chat function or the question function, which is on the panel, which should be on the side of your screen. And we'll get to those questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Geraldine. So thank you and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Jessica. I hope everybody can hear me okay. That was a great introduction. As already stated, I'm Geraldine O'Farrell, and I'm a chartered building services engineer with 50 years experience in the building industry. As Jessica has already told you, I've been working for Historic England, who are the government's advisory body for England's listed buildings, scheduled monuments, and listed landscapes and gardens for the last 23 years. So welcome to this brief presentation on how to approach an external lighting project for historic buildings and listed landscape. With the recent energy crisis, rising energy costs, and the need to reduce the amount of carbon we produce before starting any new lighting project, you need to ask yourself a few quick questions. What is the lighting really for? So is this a vanity project? Is it about improving the safety of the occupants or end users? Are you celebrating the building, or is it part of a national event, say like Remembrance Sunday? Is this lighting really needed, and is it over-designed? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to make the building stand out from its neighbours? Will you improve the enjoyment of this heritage building or space by lighting it? What are the fundamental issues to consider before starting an external lighting scheme? Well, some of these guidelines are applicable to all lighting projects, not just those to heritage buildings, but they're worth emphasising anyway. The colour of the stone, brickwork or render will help in deciding the most appropriate colour temperature of the light source. The location of the building in question will determine how much background illumination the proposed lighting installation must compete against. As in this, there is a lot of street lighting, light from advertising billboards and light from nearby shops and offices. This background lighting level will also influence your choice of lamp colour, location and quantity of the luminaires and how much illumination you use. For example, If the street lighting uses a white color temperature, then use a warm white on your building, and vice versa. With today's energy costs, it is even more important to use light and therefore energy as any other resource, i.e. as efficiently and effectively as possible. Any elevations that are not normally seen or are difficult to see should not necessarily be illuminated. In fact, again, for the same cost reasons, if you cannot see any part of the building, why bother to light it? Only the parts that are of historic interest, as shown on screen, should be lit. In this case, the modern infill parts of this listed building have not been illuminated at night. The LEDs are today's preferred lamp option, and they enable the reduction of energy used in any lighting scheme. These, along with suitable lighting controls that limit the time an external lighting scheme operates, are essential, and this will be discussed in a moment for several reasons. Next slide, please. My experience within the heritage sector has made me realize that a lot of people assume that when working with historic buildings, you should use, or you should not use, fittings of a modern contemporary design. Now, this couldn't be further from the truth. Most listed and scheduled buildings would never have had lighting installed. Even gas lighting is a relatively late intervention. It was not until the 1920s and 30s that electric lighting would have been the norm, and even then, some buildings would not have had electric lighting points in every room. Historic England does not want to see faux Victorian-style light fittings to be the default type of light fitting. We want the lighting to be the best possible to suit the desired end result. This does not mean that there will not be restrictions on what you can do regarding installation methods, but the actual luminaire itself can be as modern in design as is needed to provide the best and most suitable lighting to the building. It is unlikely that any heritage external lighting will exist beyond maybe an entrance light or possibly a column-mounted gas lantern, as can be frequently found in Westminster, in London. However, there are numerous companies that can refurbish and rewire these types of luminaire. These are important to retain, especially if they are of the same period as the building, park, or garden. Examples of this are most likely to be from the 19th century onwards. As you can see on screen, issues such as fixings can be a problem, and we always advise they are made into sacrificial materials such as mortar. Mattresses can be employed to help locate fixings without leaving permanent damage. Whenever and wherever possible, you should never fix into stonework or brickwork. Next slide, please. As a quick aside, if you're lucky enough to have a building with extant external luminaires of historic value, then, as you can see in these images, they should be brought back into use and also into their former glory. They may well form part of the official listing for the building, so it's always a best course of action to check their significance. It is also more sustainable to reuse fittings, especially those that have a strong historic connection to the building. The photographs on screen are courtesy of one of the many specialist companies that can refurbish, rewire and relamp existing lanterns. These two fittings are awaiting reinstallation, and in fact, I went to Gloucester only last week and they are up and look glorious. They're at the Grade 2 Gloucestershire Shire Hall, and they're part of the overall building's refurbishment. The building opened in 1816, and although the two lanterns would not date from that period, they have been on the building for many decades, and with modern lamps and rewiring to present-day standards, it makes sustainable sense to reuse them. Next slide, please. Of course, any luminaire refurbishment will have to satisfy the IET wiring regs, also known as British Standard 7671. The most up-to-date edition is shown on screen. Always, please always ensure that the refurbishment is carried out by a suitably qualified and knowledgeable professional company. Next slide, please. As has already happened, inefficient lamp types will cease to become available as part of the drive towards sustainable energy use. And the restriction of certain hazardous substances on lamps containing mercury is already, and its use is already banned in some electrical and electronic equipment. Most inefficient lamp types from the past can now be replaced with far more energy efficient LED equivalents. These now come in a wide range of shapes, sizes, color temperatures, and designs to mimic lamps like incandescent and fluorescent. And it is essential that this is considered when planning any future lighting refurbishment projects. Although it is accepted that LED light quality is different and more intense, plus there are some people that are affected by an imperceptible flicker, by investing in good quality LEDs and suitable controls and dimmers, this will overcome most issues. Next slide, please. By choosing suitable fittings with the right optics to prevent light pollution is an essential part of any external lighting design, whether for an historic building or not. As previously mentioned, the use of shadow and silhouette can create just as impactful nighttime views of heritage buildings and monuments, as well as rather than blasting a lot of unnecessary light at them. If ground-based lighting, uplighting is used, then care must be taken that this is controlled, as can be seen in the archway. Excuse me, in the archway on the next slide, taken at Gloucester Cathedral. Next slide, please. So in the middle image at the bottom of the screen is an example of where lighting can be safely used without wasting light up into the sky. Also, the image on the left-hand side of the screen, which is Wellington Arch in London, used uplighting to create shadow and depth to the front elevation of this monument. Returning to the main topic for today, when you've established the need for external lighting, along with a clear design brief for a nighttime appearance you desire, you must carefully consider what the building will look like during the day when the external fittings may be visible. On the top right of the screen is what can happen when this is not taken into account. The modern floodlights on the building shown at the top right-hand corner are very conspicuous and not discreet in any way. They spoil the daytime view of this period building. There are ways around the most obvious method of fixing floodlights straight onto the building's elevations, and these include using other street furniture such as lamp posts, burying the fittings in the surrounding ground surfaces, or using other surrounding buildings to locate your floodlighting on, although I do realize that this latter method can prove difficult. What is fortunate is that LED lightings are becoming smaller and more discreet and making them far easier to disguise and hide. When there are no other locations other than fixing to the building you are externally lighting, then, wherever possible, use the building's architectural features to disguise the presence of the luminaires. It is also worth reiterating again that putting parts of the building into silhouette is just as effective as shining light onto them, enabling you to hide fittings behind columns and balustrades. Next slide, please. As already touched on in slide 6, we're in the age of LED lamp technology ascendancy. This unfortunately does not, however, prevent poor design. The two images show the extremes of poor lighting. The left showing ineffective lighting that only managed to light the bottom half of the elevation, and the left at the top stories of the building in shadow. The second image shows an overlit building which has little depth, contrast, or interest. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, I've seen too many external lighting installations that have been poorly designed and overlit. This has been a contentious topic for many years, and with the increase in energy costs has become ever more so. Sending any percentage of light generated by your installation into the sky and not onto the building is not only profligate, but contributes towards the ever-increasing sky glow that is a feature of most built-up areas and cities. Light trespass is another problem that results from poorly thought out lighting design. This can result in other buildings and people being negatively impacted by your lighting, which can intrude through windows, preventing sleep as one simple example. This problem can also come from poorly designed amenity and street lighting. There's a network of national and local astronomy and environmental organizations who support the creation of more places where dark skies can be re-established. This makes the design and operational parameters of any external lighting design even more important to get right. Keeping the operational hours of any lighting scheme to a minimum is a good starting point, rather than leaving the lighting on from dusk to dawn. Switching the lighting off, say after 1 o'clock in the morning, gives the local wildlife and its food sources like moths, etc., time to spend the night in darkness, which their circadian rhythms need. Without this, breeding cycles can be impacted and food sources decline. Next slide, please. The circular economy in lighting is fast gaining a foothold throughout the world of lighting manufacture. Good maintenance is the starting point to maximize the operational life of any lighting installation. Refurbishing existing lighting is the next step in reducing the whole life carbon and avoiding any unnecessary replacements by carrying out the first step, i.e., caring for the system and maintaining it regularly. When reusing with suitable adaptation to bring them up to modern safety and wiring standards, existing fittings, either of historic value or relevance to the building, is a good example of the reuse, or as some put it, repurpose section of this virtuous circle. In repairing and reusing as much of the heritage fitting as is safe to do, we eliminate waste and pollution. This circulates materials and decouples this lighting installation from the consumption of finite resources. Where fittings are not good enough or not in good enough condition to be repaired or reused, then recycling the materials should always be considered. Next slide, please. If you need guidance and assistance with any heritage project, my colleagues and I are always available to give free advice. If you're interested in viewing the recordings of the webinars on lighting that I have produced for Historic England, then the link to one on external lighting is on the screen now. This and others can be searched for under Technical Tuesday webinars on our website, where you will find recordings on internal, emergency lighting and other building services topics. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it of interest, and I'll hand back to Jessica and take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Geraldine. I'll just give the audience a couple of a minute or two to start sending some questions through. So there were some real insights there into how lighting and refurbishing heritage and historic buildings and landscapes differs from, for example, new builds and more modern areas. So hopefully everyone found that quite useful. I'll just give it a second. Okay, so I'll just read the question out to you, Geraldine, and then if you'd like to respond. Earlier this month, Historic England published a report on retrofitting historic buildings with a focus on protecting their unique qualities and improving their energy and carbon performance. In terms of outdoor lighting, do you feel confident that this balance can truly be achieved?
I think improving the energy performance of a heritage building through its lighting, whether external or internal, is relatively easy thing to do compared to, say, heating. The use of focused LED lighting only when necessary will achieve the best solution. Added to reusing the existing luminaires where possible will also aid the embodied carbon issues that new installations face, so that the minimum amount of new resources are used in the relighting project. Also, as I said, I think lighting controls, timers will also aid and reduce the amount of energy used. As LED lamps come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes and operating temperatures, it's really not very difficult anymore to find one that will suit the application required of it. So, as I say, it's a far easier thing to achieve rather than trying to find an alternative to the heating of a historic building, which can involve other issues.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just get that another question's come in. Do you have a good example of the lighting of listed parks and gardens? Does this use both traditional existing luminaires and also contemporary fittings?
I don't have a good example, I'm afraid. I haven't been involved in very many parks and gardens projects in my 23 years at Historic England. But where, say, for example, St James's Park in London, where they're considering changing the lighting from gas to LED, we are strongly trying to persuade Westminster Council to retain the existing lamps. And if they are absolutely insistent upon taking the gas supply out, then we're working very closely with them to find a suitable LED replica of the uniqueness, if I can say, of gas lighting, colour and warmth of the end result, which is proving quite challenging. But yes, Westminster St James's Park is the only one I'm currently working with, and we have yet to find a solution. But if there are existing lamp standards, they really should, especially with regards to that park, be reused wherever possible.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. And I think you may have touched on this because I can see the word faux vintage. In your opinion, when someone is refurbishing outdoor lighting for a historic building, should they always use faux vintage and in-keeping fittings, or can luminaires with modern designs be incorporated?
My opinion is where extant fittings exist and can be reused, then every effort should be made to incorporate them into the new design. As I think I touched on, the Gloucester Town Hall has reused those two magnificent lanterns. Unfortunately, faux vintage is nearly always faux Victoriana, and it's not an approach favoured by us at all. Gas and electric lighting, as I think I said, is relatively recent, and most were built before the advent of either gas or electric lighting. So I think discreetly located fittings are the preferred method for those facade lighting schemes. And for listed gardens and fittings where these are more visible, then you should use the luminaire that gives you the best and most desired effect and the most suitable light level, so it can be as contemporary as is needed and as should be employed.
Okay, thank you. Just let me open up the next question that we've had. Okay, have you experienced lighting challenges to people with visual impairment or neurodiversity matters?
I have indeed. This tends to be more common with internal lighting. Neurodiversity issues can be challenging with LED lighting, especially, and I think I stressed this in my talk, where cheaper versions have been employed, and the flicker can produce alarming results with people, from just mild headaches to feelings of disorientation, and in some cases people collapse. So it is vitally important that you buy good quality drivers, lamps, and suitable controls. And if you have the possibility that somebody will be impacted, then this is where lighting trials are essential. They're essential anyway, but they should be carried out so that you can try and combat this impact as much as possible. As regards to visually impaired people, I think it's important that you remember that it's not so much light level, but people who have partial sight, and most people are not totally blind, they do have some sight, even if it's just a sense of light and dark, that it's the contrast that you produce. So if there are hazards, bends in the pathways through a park or other hazards, that it's important that those are illuminated, that there's a contrast between what's safe and what's dangerous. And that, I think, is a good starting point.
Thank you. And what I will say will be the final question now before we wrap things up, and that is, would addressable LED be preferred in certain scenarios to mimic older style gas lamps?
Yes. I'm not sure that they need to be addressable. Westminster Council have spent a long time trying to devise and design, I'm not quite sure with whom, an LED lamp that mimics gas lighting. Whether their system is addressable, I'm not entirely sure, although when I had one of these demonstrated to me last year, I did note that the engineer from Westminster Council was using an app on his phone, so it could well be that they do have some sort of addressable controls on them. But I'm not entirely sure it's completely successful, but obviously the greater adjustability, if that's a word, and control that you have over the LED to mimic something else, the more likely you are to succeed. But I have to say that in that particular case, we are strenuously trying to persuade people to retain at least some of the gas lighting because of its significance to London, and also the fact that we were one of the first cities in Europe to have gas lighting. So we feel as an organisation it's important that some is retained.
Okay, thank you very much, and hopefully the individual who asked that question is satisfied with that answer. So I think I'll draw it to a close here. So thank you to everyone for listening and asking those questions. If there are any that haven't been answered, what we'll do is we'll endeavour to get back to you individually after this session. In April, on the 25th, we're very pleased that Geraldine will be joining us once again to do another webinar, this time on the indoor refurbishment of historic and heritage buildings. So what we'll do is we'll start sharing the information about that afterwards. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that one as well. So thank you very much, Geraldine, for joining us, and I hope everyone found it worthwhile.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.